Grandpa's lawyer handed me a check for $38 million. My dad grabbed it, struck a match, and burned it right in front of me. I didn't argue, I just smiled. Because what he set on fire wasn't what he thought it was, and at the will reading, everything became clear when. They say blood is thicker than water. But what about betrayal so raw, so utterly devoid of humanity, that your own father would torch a multi-million-dollar inheritance check right before your eyes, just to watch you break? The air in that sterile conference room, at what used to be Greaves and Halford, was heavy with the stench of lemon polish and unbridled ambition. It was a place designed to exert power, and my family, particularly my father, Arthur Vance, was practically drowning in it. My sister, Chloe, was already there, legs crossed, that same smug smirk plastered across her face, the kind that made you think she'd just won a lawsuit blindfolded. And at the head of the polished table sat Arthur, my dad, looking every bit the CEO who'd somehow missed the memo that this was a will reading, not his quarterly shareholder meeting. Ms. Albright, the lawyer, offered me a faint nod. She'd been with the family for decades, long before they decided I was disposable. No one said hello, no one offered a hug, no one even bothered to ask about my last deployment, or if I'd returned with all my limbs intact. But I wasn't there for them, not really. I was there because I'd made a promise to Grandpa William, and that was the only reason that truly mattered. Miss Albright cleared her throat, the sound sharp in the unnerving silence. She opened the folder, her voice a calm, professional monotone, like she was reading instructions for flat-pack furniture, the kind that could unravel a marriage. First, to Chloe Vance, the family property in Evergreen Lake and the antique Steinway piano. Chloe blinked, a flash of surprise in her eyes. I knew what she was thinking. She'd expected the company, the empire. Then, to Arthur Vance, a set of first-edition Hemingway novels and a $10,000 donation to the American Ethics Council made in his name. My father snorted, a harsh, dismissive sound that echoed in the room. "That's a joke, right?" he spat. Miss Albright didn't flinch. She just calmly turned the page. And then she read my name. Alara Vance, my granddaughter, my only confidant. I leave the remainder of my estate. This includes all financial holdings, real estate, and voting control over Braden Tech Systems. Effective immediately. The air completely drained from the room. Silence. A heavy, suffocating silence. My dad's jaw tightened, his face a mask of disbelief. Chloe's smug smile didn't just crack, it shattered into a million pieces. Then, Ms. Albright slid a check across the table to me. $38,246,000. Clean. Signed. Dated. I hadn't even processed the numbers, hadn't even touched the paper, when Arthur lunged. He snatched the check, tearing it from the table like it was a personal affront to his very existence. "You think this brings you back?" he snarled, his voice laced with venom. And then, right there, in front of Miss Albright, in front of Chloe, he pulled out a lighter. He set the damn thing on fire. The check, that massive fortune, curled and blackened in his hand, the flames greedily consuming Grandpa William's signature as if it were nothing. Chloe gasped, a tiny, performative sound. Miss Albright simply leaned back, her composure unshaken, as if witnessing a man incinerate millions out of sheer spite was just another Tuesday. Then Arthur looked at me, his eyes burning with a twisted satisfaction, and sneered, "That's what you get for walking out." But I didn't flinch. I didn't shout. I didn't even blink. Instead, I just smiled. Not a happy smile, not a triumphant one. It was the kind of smile you wear when you already know the ending and you're simply watching everyone else catch up. Because what he burned wasn't what he thought it was. He didn't see the second envelope, still tucked securely inside my coat pocket. The one Grandpa William had given me just a month before he died. The one he'd wrapped in a diner napkin like it was a sacred scroll, whispering, "Don't open this unless they try to burn it." Well, they did. And I would open it. But not yet. First, I had to sit there, in that suffocatingly polished room, absorbing their fake grief and their absolute, unadulterated rage. Chloe started wailing about how obviously something wasn't right, and Arthur immediately accused Ms. Albright of forging the entire thing, as if she were some criminal mastermind with a bizarre soft spot for military granddaughters. They just kept going, spiraling. Chloe demanded a second reading. Arthur insisted on an audit. I just sat there, hands resting calmly in my lap, feeling the phantom heat of the fire fade, watching them completely unravel. If you're still with me, still reeling from that, hit that subscribe button and let me know in the comments. Have you ever had family try to gaslight you right out of your own existence? Because this was just the beginning. See, the thing about people like Arthur and Chloe is that they only understand power when it's loud, flashy, and visible. They genuinely believe that if they burn the paper, they burn the proof. That if they raise their voices, they automatically win. That if they erase you on paper, you simply cease to exist. But they didn't know me. They didn't know what I'd learned in Kandahar, the discipline, the absolute stillness required for survival. They didn't know how many nights I'd stayed invisible, just waiting for the right moment. They definitely didn't know what Grandpa William had told me the day I left. You're the only one I trust to finish what I started. So when my dad flicked the ashes of that burned check across the table, his eyes full of contempt, and told me I was out, I just smiled. Because I already knew the truth, I was the only one still in. Under the table, my fingers instinctively brushed the edge of that untouched envelope in my coat, and a quiet resolve settled deep in my bones. I wasn't leaving empty-handed. They could argue. They could throw all the threats they wanted. They could set the entire room on fire for all I cared. My real job was done the moment I saw the dawning horror in Chloe's eyes. The exact second she realized the empire she thought was hers had just slipped right through her perfectly French manicured fingers. I walked out without saying a single word. No dramatic door slam, no grand exit. Just the steady, unwavering sound of my boots on that polished, hollow wood. The courthouse parking lot was exactly as I remembered it, half empty, the asphalt cracked, the old oak tree by the gate leaning precariously. I used to climb that tree when I was 8, before Arthur told me, with that dismissive wave of his hand, that girls didn't belong in trees. That was probably the first time I ever truly felt like I didn't belong anywhere. The drive back to my apartment was silent. I didn't turn on the radio. Just let the low hum of the road and the frantic rhythm of my own heartbeat try to drown out my thoughts. That envelope, still unopened, felt like it was burning a hole in the passenger seat. I didn't open it. Not yet. Instead, I poured myself a glass of water and stood in the kitchen, staring out at a street I didn't particularly like, but a street I'd never left. The sheer weight of it all. The inheritance, the fire, the deafening silence, was still settling over me. And it felt too familiar. It felt exactly like that other silence, years ago, when I came home from my first deployment. It was Thanksgiving. I'd been gone for almost 18 months. Syria. Border detail. Convoy defense. You name it, I'd seen it. I'd watched friends bleed out in the sand. I'd buried a journal under rubble when a roadside bomb detonated literally 2 feet from my tent. I still have the constant ringing in my right ear from it. But when I finally came home, exhausted and scarred, Arthur just looked at me and said, "You didn't write." That was it. No, welcome home. No, I'm glad you made it back. Just that quiet, suffocating judgment that filled the room like toxic secondhand smoke. The house itself was different too. My room, my sanctuary, was just gone. Physically gone. My desk, my bed, my bookshelf, all replaced. All my letters, my photos, even my graduation flag, completely vanished, as if I'd never even lived there. In their place were 2 sterile beige armchairs, a fake potted orchid, and some saccharine quote about calm waters and quiet minds framed on the wall. It looked like a dentist's waiting room, honestly, except this one had a door that used to proudly say Alara and now just read guest. My sister, Chloe, walked past me in the hall, cradling a steaming mug of peppermint tea. She looked up, that familiar smirk twisting her lips, and said, "Don't be so dramatic. You were gone for, like, a year and a half." I wanted to laugh. Instead, I just left. I moved into a cheap apartment off the highway, worked part-time security at a logistics yard, just waiting for the VA to process my paperwork. Every few weeks, a wire transfer would magically appear from someone named W. Vance, just enough to keep the heat on and gas in my car. No notes, no contact, but I always knew it was him. Grandpa William. He never had to say much, because he saw me like nobody else did. When I was 12 and wanted to enlist in junior ROTC, he didn't laugh. He showed up with boots that actually fit and a grin that said I'd just passed some secret test. When Arthur would inevitably declare the military a dead end for people who couldn't cut it in business, Grandpa William would just shrug and say, "Maybe that's why your board meetings feel like war zones, son." He didn't pick sides. He just picked me. And maybe that's why, when he got sick and the calls suddenly stopped, I knew, deep down, something was profoundly wrong. I visited him, just once, near the very end. He was thinner, quieter, but his mind, that brilliant, sharp mind, was still completely intact. He handed me that envelope at the Hillcross Diner, over lukewarm coffee and a shared, slightly stale piece of lemon pie. "Don't open this unless they burn it," he said, his eyes serious. I remember thinking he was being dramatic. So I said something sarcastic, something like, "What, you think they're going to set fire to a multi-million-dollar check?" He didn't smile. He just looked at me and said, quietly, "I think they'll try to erase you." And just like that, without another word, we both knew exactly what he meant. I hadn't opened the envelope yet, but I was getting agonizingly close. Its weight on my kitchen counter seemed to grow heavier by the minute, as if it held a secret only it understood. I stared at it for a long time, half hoping it would magically open itself and solve all my problems. It didn't. I picked it up with both hands, carefully, like it might bite. The envelope was thick, sealed with a familiar splash of red wax, the kind Grandpa William always used for birthday cards, like it made them more official. I cracked it open with my thumbnail, my heart pounding, and pulled out a single folded sheet and a tiny USB drive taped to the back. The paper was typed, notarized, and dated 3 weeks before he died. It was a trust transfer form. The check, the one Arthur had so dramatically burned, had been real, yes. But it was nothing more than a decoy. The actual funds had already been transferred. The real inheritance had been processed quietly, legally, with a digital paper trail so airtight it would make my father sweat through his bespoke $5,000 blazer. I stared at the account number at the bottom of the page. The last 4 digits were Grandpa William's birthday reversed. He knew I'd remember. I plugged in the USB. No password. No delay. Just a single folder labeled Inheritance. Inside, bank documents, legal authorizations, company control transfers, and what looked like a draft of a second will. I exhaled a long, shuddering breath, leaned back in my chair, and felt something I hadn't felt in years. Not just safety, but confirmation. I wasn't crazy. But that surge of relief? It lasted all of 5 minutes. I immediately logged into my bank app, desperate to confirm the linked account. The app glitched. Then it spat out an error message, "Account not found." I tried another card, another login. Declined. I typed everything slower, more carefully, as if precision could somehow magically fix whatever this was. Still nothing. This didn't feel like a glitch anymore. I called customer service. Some guy named Dylan picked up, sounding like he'd rather be anywhere else on Earth. "Hi, yeah, my account's saying I'm not in the system anymore," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Can you check on that?" He asked for my name, my birthday, the last 4 of my social. I gave them all. Another agonizing pause. Then he said, his voice flat, "It was certified by the registrar's office 2 weeks ago." I hung up before my voice could crack. Next stop, the DMV. I waited an hour behind a woman passionately arguing about a parking ticket from 2006. When I finally got to the counter, I handed over my ID. The clerk scanned it, frowned, tapped a few keys, and then looked up at me, her eyes wide. "Ma'am," she said, "you're flagged as legally deceased." I stared at her, feeling utterly numb. "I'm standing right here," I deadpanned. "I get that," she replied, unmoved, "but the system doesn't. You'll have to file a correction through Vital Records." "How long does that take?" She peered at me over her reading glasses, a knowing look in her eyes. "Depends on who you pissed off." I walked out before I could actually punch a window. Back on the sidewalk, I felt like a literal ghost. People passed me oblivious, like I was just another normal person, like I still existed. But I'd seen enough bureaucracy in my life to know, once a system decides you're dead, it takes an absolute hell of a lot to prove otherwise. Someone, clearly, had gone to great lengths to make damn sure I disappeared. The sky was a bruised gray, heavy and overcast. I pulled my coat tighter, a sudden chill running through me. Across the street, partially obscured by a line of bare, skeletal trees, a woman stood watching. Her sunglasses were ridiculously oversized for the dim light, and a familiar blue silk scarf was looped once around her neck. My mother's scarf. The one she'd claimed the dry cleaners had lost 3 years ago. She didn't wave. She didn't move. She just stood there, utterly still, utterly silent, like a threat that hadn't yet found its voice. I stepped into traffic, crossing slowly, my eyes locked on her. When I reached the other side, she was gone. No footsteps. No trace. Just a chilling echo in the silence. Back at my apartment, I frantically pulled out every letter Grandpa William had ever sent me. Dozens of them, folded into neat stacks tucked inside old books, crammed into drawers, hidden behind picture frames. His handwriting was surprisingly steady, even near the end. In one of the envelopes, wrapped in a faded handkerchief, I found an old brass key. The tag on it simply read, Langford, Box 17. He'd given it to me on my 18th birthday, with a cryptic smile, saying, "You'll need this someday." I guess someday had finally arrived. I threw on a hoodie, grabbed the key, and walked straight out the door before I could talk myself out of it. Langford's storage wasn't far. A 15-minute drive through the quieter, forgotten part of town, past crumbling storefronts, cracked sidewalks, mailboxes hanging by a single hinge. I parked in front of a wine shop that looked like it hadn't been open since before the pandemic, and found the unmarked door between it and a boarded-up bookstore. No sign, just a black buzzer and a faded camera lens that blinked red once when I pressed it. A woman in her late 50s, with a no-nonsense ponytail, opened the door. No name tag, no smile. "You have a key?" she asked, her voice flat. I handed it over. She glanced at the tag, Box 17, checked a clipboard, then waved me inside without a word. The hallway was narrow and cold, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead like they hadn't been replaced since the Reagan administration. We walked past 6 heavy steel doors before she stopped at one, typed in a code, and opened it. "Take your time," she said, and shut the door behind me. The room was windowless, silent, just rows of industrial-looking drawers set into concrete walls. I found Box 17 halfway down, at waist level, and slid it open. Inside, pristine, sat a black fireproof folder and a manila envelope. No dust, no musty smell. It felt like it had been waiting for me. I sat down on the cold concrete floor. The first thing I pulled out was a certified cashier's check. Same amount. Same name. But this time, it was real. This time, it had security features baked right into the paper. The watermark shimmered when I tilted it. Taped to the back was a tiny red sticker, non-negotiable copy burned. That single sticker told me everything I needed to know. The manila envelope had a sticky note on the front, in Grandpa William's unmistakable handwriting. "Trust no one." Not even her. No name. Just her. But I had a chilling guess. Inside, printouts of emails, handwritten notes, legal drafts. He had documented everything. Every conversation with his lawyer. Every asset transfer. Every single board meeting agenda from Braden Tech Systems for the past 12 months. Some of the papers bore Chloe's name, meeting minutes she attended, contracts she'd signed. None of it looked casual. The final document was heavier. A flash drive, nestled inside a small velvet pouch, and a note. "Play only once and only when you're alone." I pocketed it and got out of there, fast. Back at my apartment, I locked the door, pulled the blinds, and, with trembling hands, plugged in the flash drive. No label. No folders. Just one file. W. Vance. Final. I clicked it. Grandpa William's face filled the screen. He looked tired, thinner than I remembered, but his eyes, still sharp, held that familiar glint. He was sitting in the sunroom of his house, a soft, golden light pouring over his shoulder, a filter that couldn't quite hide the truth etched on his face. "If you're seeing this, Alara," he began, his voice even, devoid of drama, "then they did what I thought they'd do." He knew. He always knew. "I've watched them lie to your face, dismiss your service, twist your absence into ammunition. And I did nothing for too long. That ends now." He leaned forward slightly, his gaze unwavering. "You're the only one who ever told me the truth, even when I didn't want to hear it. That's why I left it all to you. Not just the money, the name, the company, the very ground it's built on. I'm giving you the foundation because he said, with absolute certainty, you know what to do with it." He paused, a long, pregnant silence. "Your father will try to erase you. He'll say you abandoned the family. He'll weaponize your past. He'll pretend you don't exist. Let him." Then, a faint smile, just barely there, touched his lips. Because the only thing more dangerous than a man with money is a woman with receipts. The screen went black. No logo. No goodbye. Just silence. I was alone in my dark apartment, the immense weight of a legacy settling over me, sitting at a cheap desk I'd bought off Craigslist. I sat there for a long time, not thinking, not planning, just breathing. Instinctively, I pulled the papers from the manila envelope and spread them across the floor. Line by line. Signature by signature. Cross-referencing every number, every name. In the corner of one printout, a contact name I hadn't seen in years jumped out at me. Beatrice Vance. My dad's second wife. Technically my stepmother, but only on paper. She'd vanished after my mom died, married Arthur within the year, and floated through life like a ghost with a perfect blowout and absolutely zero opinions. I hadn't thought about her in forever, but her name was there, right below a legal filing timestamped 2 weeks before Grandpa William's death. Which meant she'd been involved. Not just in the background. I circled her name with a red marker, underlining it twice. Beatrice Vance rarely showed up in conversations, but when she did, things usually went sideways. She was static. Never the center of the noise, just enough to distort the signal. The last real thing I remembered her saying to me was at my mom's funeral, when she'd put a hand on my shoulder and said, "Your mother was complicated." That was her version of sympathy. I rechecked the timestamp. The filing was lodged through a small, nondescript estate law firm in Charleston, connected to a property Grandpa William had held in trust for over 20 years. I'd never known about it because my name had never been on any deed, until now. I opened the folder from the USB again and found a second address listed under Confidential Holdings. Langford. But not the vault I'd just visited. This was a second one I'd never even heard of. The file stated, Box Array 6 billion. Entry via security list only. I paused. My name was printed next to the access line. Access level confirmed. Langford Security Vaults was a 3-hour drive outside the city. The place looked more like a Cold War museum than a storage facility. Steel gates, motion sensors, guards with actual firearms. This wasn't a place you walked into with questions. Not unless you already had all the correct answers. I drove out just before noon, parked outside the perimeter, and walked in with nothing but the old brass key, the printout, and a knot of nerves I hadn't felt since Kandahar. The woman at the front desk wore a severe navy blazer with no name tag. She scanned the key, then looked me up and down, her gaze piercing. ID? I slid it across the counter. She scanned it, looked up, a flicker of something in her eyes. You're dead, she stated, flatly. Only legally, I replied, my voice steady. I'm working on that. Her lips twitched, a tiny, almost imperceptible movement, as if she wanted to smile but knew better. She typed something else, then nodded. Follow me. I did. Down another corridor, colder, more clinically silent than the first vault. More cameras watched our every move. The silence was surgical. She opened a door labeled, Array 6 billion, and simply motioned me inside. No words. This one didn't look like a bank vault. It looked like a private evidence locker. I found box 6 billion on the middle shelf, opened it with the key. Inside, a black briefcase and a sealed manila folder with my name in stark block letters. No title, no stamp. Just Alara Vance underlined once, as if it needed no further explanation. The briefcase clicked open with its old push-button latches. Inside, a deed, a corporate ownership ledger, and a single flash drive nestled in a velvet-lined pocket. The deed was for the Hollow Foundation, listed as a non-profit veteran support center located on the grounds of the Charleston property. The name on the document, Alara Vance, Executive Director, sole owner. Beneath it, legal filings confirmed that all holdings from Braden Tech's humanitarian division had been officially transferred to Hollow 6 weeks before Grandpa William died. Quietly. Completely legal. No press. The ledger showed something even more astonishing. Complete ownership of Braden Tech's executive shares had been reassigned through a trust mechanism that completely bypassed the family board. He'd handed me the entire company. Silently. Without waiting for their approval. The flash drive glowed blue when I plugged it in. Another video file, no title. I hit play. Grandpa William was sitting in the same sunroom, this time with files stacked around him. If you made it to Vault 2, he said, his voice softer, then you figured out the first one wasn't the whole picture. He reached off camera and held up a document. This is the transfer of ownership for the humanitarian arm. The part 1 built from scratch after Vietnam. The part Arthur never touched because he couldn't monetize it. I left it to you because you never asked me for anything, but you showed up when it counted. He looked down briefly, choosing his next words with care. I couldn't stop what they planned, Alara, but I made sure they couldn't erase you. You don't need their permission. You never did. All you need now is proof they forged your name. That's your keystone. Everything else will fall after that. He looked straight at the camera, his eyes burning with conviction. Don't flinch, Alara. They're going to come hard. The screen went dark. I sat there, surrounded by a dead man's voice and a war he'd left for me to finish. I slid the flash drive back into its pouch and, with a heavy sigh, called the one person I never, ever thought I'd need to. Beatrice. She didn't answer on the first try or the second. But on the third, she picked up, her voice a perfectly polished, rehearsed tone, as if I were a reporter calling about her skincare routine. You knew, I stated, not a question, just a raw accusation. A tense silence stretched between us. I didn't sign anything, she finally replied, her voice tight. I want that on record. I didn't need to ask what she meant. I already knew. You helped file it, I pushed. I handed Arthur an envelope. I didn't ask what was in it. He said it was an insurance document for estate protection. I believed him. Her voice was barely a whisper now, a fragile defense. That wasn't a lie. That's how she survived in that house. I waited. He had a notary come by. A friend of his. She stamped everything. I thought it was something boring and complicated, you know, rich people legal stuff. She sounded pathetic, almost. And how long ago was this? I asked, my voice chillingly calm. 3 weeks before your grandfather passed. Did you see a death certificate? Another pause. Longer this time. Yes, she admitted, her voice trembling now. You read it. I didn't need to, she said, a new note of defiance. Your name was on it. That was all I needed to hear. I didn't thank her. I just hung up, the silence of my apartment suddenly suffocating. Back in my apartment, I ripped open my old filing cabinet, the one I hadn't touched in a year, and pulled out my original Social Security card, birth certificate, and passport. All still very much in my name. I took them straight to the county registrar's office, demanding to speak to someone about a fraudulent death record. The clerk, a tired-looking woman, took one look at my paperwork and frowned. Then she looked at her screen. I don't know how this happened, she said, her voice full of confusion, but your file was closed by court order. What court? I asked, my heart hammering. Family Estate Division, she replied. The order came through as part of a sealed emergency motion. Very rare. Can I see it? No, she said, shaking her head. Not unless you get a judge to open it. How long does that take? She peered at me over her reading glasses, a knowing look in her eyes. Depends on who you pissed off. I walked out with a throbbing headache and a printout that simply confirmed what I already knew. Someone had gone to extraordinary lengths to legally erase me, and someone else had stamped it through as if it were nothing more than routine paperwork. Back home, I dug into those printed emails from the vault. One name kept resurfacing like a bad dream: Dr. Evelyn Shaw. A retired physician, known for doing house calls for elite families, including mine. The emails revealed she'd verified my long-term mental instability and identity confusion in a formal letter addressed to the estate court. I had never, not once, met this woman. Her phone number was disconnected, but her address was still in the system, just one town over. I drove there that night. The house was small, overgrown, paint peeling from the siding. No car in the driveway. The lights were off. But the mailbox had mail dated just 2 days earlier. Someone still lived here. I knocked. No answer. So I sat in my car and waited. 30 agonizing minutes later, a sedan pulled up. An older woman, precisely matching the description of Dr. Evelyn Shaw from the license plate frame, got out with 2 grocery bags. She saw me, and she froze. I got out, walking slowly, my hands in my jacket pockets, my gaze locked on hers. "I'm not here to threaten you," I said, my voice low and steady. "But you signed something about me. Something false. And I need to know who told you to." She blinked hard, her brain buffering. Was it Arthur Vance?" I prompted. She didn't answer, just nodded. Slowly. Shamefully. "He said you were mentally unwell," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Said you'd suffered psychological damage overseas. That you believed things that weren't real. He made it sound tragic, and I believed him. I signed what he gave me. I didn't know they'd actually file it." "You thought he wanted fake medical records just for fun?" I asked, my voice dripping with ice. "I thought it was a formality for inheritance cleanup. He said you'd agreed to it." I didn't bother arguing. "Get a lawyer," I told her, my voice sharp. "And don't answer any more of his calls." She didn't respond, just scrambled back toward her door, locking it behind her with a definitive click. It wasn't just the injustice that burned most. It was how incredibly easy it had been for them. How utterly casual. Signing me off the planet was, to them, no different than renewing a car lease. And somewhere, buried deep in that treacherous paper trail, I just knew Chloe's name was waiting. So I drove straight to the only person I trusted who'd know how to burn down an empire without leaving a single fingerprint. Simone Maxwell answered the door in sweatpants, a threadbare Harvard Law hoodie, holding a slice of cold pizza and a mug of black coffee that smelled like it had been reheated twice. Her apartment was a beautiful, chaotic mess, lived in and absolutely crammed with files that could probably collapse a senator or 2 if anyone knew where to look. She took one look at my face and just stepped aside. "This better be illegal," she deadpanned. "It is." "Good," she said, pushing the pizza slice into my hand. "Eat. You look like a ghost with a grudge." "I know," I mumbled. I sat down on her busted leather couch while she opened the folder I'd brought. She flipped through the documents with an unnerving calm, like a seasoned card shark counting cards in a casino she owned. The forged death certificate. The false medical report. The estate filings. The ownership transfers. The burn check. The flash drive. She didn't speak a word until she reached the page with Chloe's clearly forged signature. "Classic," she muttered, a low growl. "They filed it through a Delaware shell. Sloppy. Did they actually think no one would check?" "I think," I said, my voice barely a whisper, "they didn't expect me to come back." She raised an eyebrow, a wry smirk playing on her lips. "They filed you dead. That's not coming back. That's biblical." Simone used to run a nonprofit legal aid group for veterans with dishonorable discharges. She'd represented soldiers who were falsely accused, wrongly imprisoned, and mercilessly gaslit by their own command. She once sued the Pentagon over a housing scam and won. That was before she lost funding, quit the nonprofit world in disgust, and started working out of her living room on cases the big firms wouldn't touch. "I'll need access to your VA files," she stated, her focus absolute. "And anything you have from the military, deployment orders, discharge papers, especially anything with your original signature." I handed her a second folder from my bag. She scanned it, her eyes sharp. "This proves you're alive. Proves you didn't agree to squat." And if we can match this signature to the one they used on the stock transfer. She trailed off, her eyes meeting mine. You can take them down. No, she corrected me, her voice firm. You can. I hadn't expected that. You want revenge or justice? She asked, taking a sip of the worst-smelling coffee I'd ever encountered. Because they don't come in the same box. What's the difference? I asked, genuinely curious. Justice, she said, follows the law. Revenge breaks it. I didn't answer. She turned to her computer, typed for 30 seconds, then looked back at me. The Braden Tech Board will be vulnerable if we hit them at their annual audit window. That's in 11 days. If you want to blow this up, that's your shot. I want it airtight, I said, my resolve hardening. No spectacle. No scandal. Just facts and fire. Simone grinned, a fierce, unapologetic flash of teeth. Facts and fire. That's going on my gravestone. She pulled out her phone and called someone named Felix. Felix Stone, she said, got a live one. Military inheritance, fraud, forged death, the works. Meet me at the office. Bring the clean laptop. She hung up and turned back to me. Felix is a forensic document analyst. Worked odd intel jobs. He's got the kind of eyes that can spot a forged signature at 50 yards, and he won't blink at who we're going after. I nodded. What do you need from me? Full authorization. Everything. I'll draft it up. In the meantime, don't talk to anyone. Don't post a thing. And for the love of God, don't try to play hero. This isn't the part where you go rogue. It's the part where you let me build the kill shot. I leaned back on the couch, my hands still clenched into tight fists. Simone watched me, her expression unreadable. You all right? I thought I was done being in wars, I admitted. She shrugged. Family ones are worse. Fewer rules. I left an hour later with a burner phone, a folder labeled temporary legal hold, and a direct line to Felix Stone, who texted me exactly 2 things before I even got home. We'll verify every doc. But first, we find the signature that buries them. I didn't respond. I sat in the parking lot for 10 minutes, staring at the steering wheel. The last time I'd followed an order this precise, I was wearing body armor and praying no one tripped an IED. Now, I was wearing a hoodie, carrying a USB drive, and about to incinerate my entire family's name, legally. The war had already started. This was just the first real shot fired. I tossed the burner phone onto the passenger seat and drove directly to the desolate storage unit where I kept the few things no one else in my family knew I still possessed. Unit 11B. It sat at the end of a crumbling row of metal garages behind a busted fence in South Brighton. No cameras. No fancy national chain contracts. Just a grizzled guy named Dennis who ran the place and never asked questions as long as your rent cleared. Mine always did. Inside the unit, a beat-up black plastic footlocker, military-issued, scratched and dented like it had stories to tell. I cracked it open and pulled out my deployment binder, orders, discharge papers, mission reports, and, most importantly, hard copies of my signature from 6 years of federal paperwork. Not a digital trail, no easy edits, all original, physical proof. I drove straight to Simone's office, laying everything on the table. Felix Stone was already there, mid-30s, wire-framed glasses, a neat ponytail, and a resting face that suggested he might actually enjoy an interrogation. He gave me a polite nod, like we were fellow operatives on a crisis mission. No small talk. He picked up one of my documents, held it under a UV lamp, then pulled out a separate folder labeled Braden Tech Equity Transfer. Inside were the documents Chloe had filed on my behalf. 2 pages in, Felix grunted, a sound of grim satisfaction. See this? He pointed to a small, almost imperceptible loop in the G of my last name. You do this little hook on the downstroke, consistently. But here, he flipped to the fake transfer document. Flatline. No hook. Also, the signature is scanned. You're sure? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. He didn't even look up. It's a lift. Someone pulled it from a military DD-214, my guess. Probably your 2018 discharge packet. It's public enough. Sloppy execution, though. Can you prove it? He snapped a picture, then pulled up specialized software on his laptop. Side-by-side comparison. Line pressure analysis. Pixel compression levels. Overlay render. In under 2 minutes, he looked up, his eyes bright. I can write the affidavit tonight. This would fall apart in court in under 10 minutes. Simone handed me a printout. Here's what that forgery gave them. Chloe sold 40% of your voting shares last quarter to a holding company tied to Arthur's real estate trust. They're trying to roll the entire company under full family control before the next board vote. My stomach dropped. She signed with my name. She signed with a fake version of your name, Simone corrected, her voice hard, during a time when you were legally deceased. This isn't just a civil problem anymore. What is it then? I asked, a new kind of cold anger simmering. Felix answered, his voice clinical. Wire fraud. Document fraud. Possibly conspiracy. If Arthur coordinated the notary, definitely perjury. And if the assets cross state lines, we're in federal territory. Simone leaned forward, her eyes gleaming. This is the thread, Alara. We pull it right, and the whole damn sweater comes undone. I stared at the documents, at my name on paper, at what was supposed to be my handwriting. It felt strange, like watching someone wear my skin and wave from a balcony I'd never stepped on. Simone added, I've filed a preliminary injunction to freeze the company's board action, but it won't stick unless we get a judge to see this evidence firsthand. She looked me dead in the eye. What do you need me to do? Stay alive. Stay quiet. And don't lose your temper. This only works if they don't know you're building the case. Let them think you're still stunned. Felix handed me a flash drive, a backup of all his findings. For your records. I tucked it into my pocket. The whole thing felt too neat, too logical. And that was precisely what scared me. My family didn't operate in logic. They operated in chaos, distraction, and narrative. But I wasn't playing defense anymore. And they'd feel that soon. But first, I needed one last piece. A thread left hanging, one she never meant for me to see. I pulled up the interview request I denied 3 months ago and called the reporter she'd ghosted. His name was Gavin Reed, a veteran investigative journalist who'd won a regional Emmy for exposing a defense contractor bribery ring in Arlington. He answered on the first ring, like he was expecting bad news. This is Gavin. This is Alara Vance, I said. You asked my sister for comment in April. A pause. Quick, sharp, loaded. You're the one Braden Tech filed dead. That's me. Interesting. What changed? I'm not dead. That'll do it. We met that night in a diner just off Route 15. He wore a worn denim jacket and had a recorder on the table before I even sat down. No pretense, just pure journalism. I laid it all out. The forged death certificate, the fake signatures, the brazen ownership grab. I showed him Felix's affidavit and the filing Simone had started. I didn't hold anything back. Gavin didn't blink. He just kept jotting notes, tapping occasionally on his phone. I've heard whispers, he said, his voice low. That Arthur's prepping to take Braden Tech public. You can't do that clean if a $38 million asset transfer is sitting on a forged corpse. Exactly. Do you want this public or just used as leverage? I want the truth to work harder than their lies. Copy that. He didn't promise a timeline. Didn't say when or where. Just told me he'd run it clean and tight. 2 days later, the first article dropped. Daughter declared dead, cut from $38 million inheritance. Braden Tech family power play unraveling. It hit the morning news cycle like a nail through the throat. By noon, a second wave followed. Blogs, comment threads, veterans groups, corporate gossip pages. My inbox exploded. People I'd served with sent screenshots, laughing emojis accompanying texts like, "Is this for real?" I didn't answer any of them. That afternoon, Arthur went live on a local news station, desperately trying to do damage control. He sat in a perfectly tailored navy suit, his American flag pin gleaming, his carefully trimmed beard framing a face he tried to make look concerned. He spoke in that voice he reserved for investors, warm, confident, utterly manipulative. We're saddened by the misinformation being spread. Alara has had difficulties since her return from overseas. The family has done its best to support her through that process. Sometimes people lash out when they feel isolated. Then they rolled old footage of me in uniform, walking off AC 130, sand still clinging to my boots. After that, a damning headline from years ago, civilian casualty inquiry, Sergeant Vance refused strike order. That was their angle. I was unstable, disgraced, dangerous. No mention that I refused to target a building full of noncombatants. No mention that the inquiry had completely cleared me. No mention that the only reason I'd even been reported was because the commanding officer's cousin ran the contractor supplying the airstrike. They weaponized my past like it was a campaign ad. Simone called me before I could throw a chair through my television. "Breathe," she said, her voice calm amidst the storm. This was always coming. They're rewriting history. They're buying time. And that means they're scared. Felix sent a message 5 minutes later. Let them overplay the receipts. Don't blink. He was right. The problem with men like Arthur was they thought power made them invisible. But they'd never face someone trained for years to disappear and strike in silence. I wasn't their daughter anymore. I wasn't their problem. I was the perimeter breach. And that made them sloppy. By 9 p.m., I had 3 anonymous tips in my inbox. All former Braden Tech employees. One worked in internal audits. One handled digital assets. Another had left with a severance package and an NDA she was now ready to shatter. The third tip was a PDF, asset transfer logs, transaction trails, and a fake consulting invoice signed by Chloe Vance on behalf of Alara Vance. The same forged signature Felix had flagged. They hadn't stopped at the stock. They'd been moving funds, too. Simone immediately forwarded the file to the district clerk, requesting an emergency hearing. I stayed up, poring over every line. On page 17, there was proof of payment to a legal courier service and the contact for coordination, Beatrice Vance. I closed the file, grabbed my coat, and headed out, needing to move before the white-hot rage in my gut settled into something quieter, something colder. The air outside was brutal, the kind of cold that made everything feel sharper, more personal. I didn't drive. I walked 15 blocks, fueled by sheer adrenaline, to a narrow brick building where Gavin Reed worked nights, his office above a dusty used record store that hadn't sold anything since 2009. The buzzer didn't work, so I pounded on the glass. He opened the door, sleeves rolled up, a pen tucked behind his ear, and a look that screamed, "Please tell me you've got something better than your last bombshell." I handed him a flash drive. "It's time," I said, my voice hoarse. He didn't ask what was on it. He just plugged it in, loaded the video, and watched. Grandpa William's face filled the screen. No intro. No preamble. Just him, sitting in that familiar sunroom, files spread across his lap, his voice steady, resolute, as if this were a business meeting with history itself on the line. "If you're watching this," he began, then Arthur did what I couldn't stop him from doing. His face was calm. Not bitter. Just done. He was never supposed to inherit Braden Tech. He never earned it. He never truly understood what it was for. He saw contracts. I saw responsibility. He saw numbers. I saw people. The light hit his shoulder just right. No drama. Just crystal clear clarity. I changed the will because I saw what Alara had become. Not perfect, no, but principled. And when you build something with the intention of it outliving you, you don't hand it off to the loudest bidder. You hand it off to the person who won't sell it the second you're in the ground. He paused, his gaze fixed on the camera. Alara is the future of this company. This family. And if they try to bury her, let this serve as record. I changed everything of my own free will. No pressure. No manipulation. Just a choice made with both eyes wide open. He leaned forward, closer to the lens. They're going to lie. And they're going to lie big. But the truth doesn't blink. Then the video ended. Nothing flashy, no fade out. Just abrupt blackness. Gavin looked at me, his face grim. "You want this live?" "Everywhere," I stated, my voice firm. He didn't hesitate. 15 minutes later, the clip was streaming on 3 major platforms, linked in a follow-up article, and attached to a press release featuring quotes from 2 legal analysts and a former Braden Tech employee who'd agreed to go on the record. By midnight, it had over 300,000 views. By morning, Arthur's PR team was in a complete, frantic scramble. His legal rep issued a vague statement, calling the video emotionally charged but irrelevant to formal legal processes. That was their classic play: minimize, then wait for it to blow over. Except it didn't. By noon, half the defense tech community had picked it up. Military blogs, Reddit forums, stock chatter rooms, everyone had a take, and most of them weren't flattering. Chloe wasn't there, probably because she knew the look on Arthur's face meant he was about to make things catastrophically worse. "I understand emotions are high," he blustered, trying to regain control. "But family matters should be resolved privately." Then came the fatal mistake. He added, his voice oozing disdain, "This company was never meant to be run by someone with a history of mental instability and unverified claims." There it was. The mask completely dropped. Gavin clipped that line and posted it solo. By 6 p.m., it had amassed 2 million views. People didn't just turn on Arthur, they dragged him. Veterans called him out, shareholders questioned the ethics clause, former employees posted anonymously about how he ran meetings like military tribunals, convinced of his own God complex. The Braden Tech Board, rattled, issued a rare public statement, confirming a temporary freeze on all asset movement pending an internal review. Simone called me after the statement went live. "You just cracked the damn wall, Alara," she said, a note of triumph in her voice. "Now all we need is the hammer." I showed up to court dressed in all black, and I didn't smile once. No lipstick, no jewelry. Just clean lines, polished boots, and the pregnant silence that fills a room just before a controlled detonation. Simone had told me to look like leadership. I'd told her I already did. Arthur arrived with a fresh haircut, a custom navy suit, and 2 attorneys straight from a corporate catalog. His face was tight, no smirk, no eye contact. Simone once told me she'd seen Judge Kinley dismiss a millionaire mid-sentence for dramatic tone. That was exactly the kind of judge we wanted. Simone stood as our case was called. "We're here to contest the suppression of legal identity and the fraudulent execution of financial documents related to the estate of William Vance." As she spoke, Arthur's lawyer, a smooth-talking shark named Benson Price, rose with a rehearsed sigh. "Your Honor, this is a family dispute dressed up in courtroom drag." The decedent's will was read, reviewed, and witnessed. My clients, Mr. Vance and Ms. Chloe Vance, acted entirely within the bounds of estate protocol. Judge Kinley didn't blink. "Then you won't mind if I see the video." Benson blanched. "Video?" Simone tapped her tablet. The lights dimmed. The monitor lit up. And there he was. Grandpa William. Calm as ever. "If they're watching this," he said, his voice echoing in the hallowed courtroom, "it means they tried to bury her. But this isn't just money. It's memory. It's legacy. And if they tried to burn hers down, this is how she comes back." No one spoke when the clip ended. The silence was clean, heavy. The kind people respect. Judge Kinley folded her hands, her gaze sweeping over the courtroom. "What's the defense's position on this testimony?" Benson cleared his throat, trying to regain his footing. "It's emotionally compelling, Your Honor, but ultimately irrelevant to legal standing." Simone merely raised an eyebrow. Then perhaps the forged signature, the falsified death certificate, and the wire fraud logs will provide better context. She handed over a thick binder, meticulously documented, time-stamped, and cross-verified. It included a sworn affidavit from the doctor who had been misled into certifying Ms. Vance's death. Chloe squirmed in her chair, her composure utterly shattered. Arthur leaned forward, his hands clenched, looking like he wanted to break the table in half. Judge Kinley flipped through the binder for a full 30 seconds. "It doesn't sound like much, unless you're the one being exposed." Then came the slow, deliberate nod. "Let the record reflect," she said, her voice clear and commanding, "that I find the evidence of identity suppression and signature forgery credible and serious." Benson stood again, desperate now. "Now, Your Honor, even if there was confusion, these events unfolded under the belief that Ms. Vance had abandoned her role in the family and company." Judge Kinley didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. You didn't just try to manipulate this court, she stated, turning her formidable gaze directly to Arthur. You tried to erase a person. A veteran. Your own daughter. She then turned to Chloe. And you facilitated it. Chloe opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Judge Kinley's gavel hit once. Thwack. This court recognizes Alara Vance as the sole legal heir to William Vance's estate and the rightful controller of Braden Tech Systems and all associated assets. Benson tried to interject, but Judge Kinley cut him off with a look that could crack a windshield. All transfers, sales, and actions made under false authority are hereby frozen, pending criminal investigation. I didn't flinch. Didn't smirk. I just stood there, still, like every muscle in my body had been waiting for this moment to exhale, and didn't quite know how. Arthur stared straight ahead, his jaw clenched so tight I thought his teeth might shatter. Chloe looked like she wanted to cry, but had completely forgotten how. Simone leaned over and whispered, "You just took the throne, Vance." Outside the courthouse, the press was already gathering, a hungry mob. Gavin had a camera crew on standby. I walked right past them. No statement. No comment. No spin. Just the unwavering sound of my boots on the stone, and the weight of my name, finally sitting right. I took the long way to the cafe, letting the brutal cold wind slap some of the courtroom's heavy weight off my shoulders. Chloe had chosen a perfectly neutral spot, the Midtown Cafe, overlit, overpriced, and teeming with professionals pretending to be busy. She was already there when I walked in, sitting by the window with 2 coffees on the table. She hadn't touched either. When she saw me, she stood up too fast, a frantic, awkward motion, unsure if she was supposed to greet me or brace for impact. I sat down without speaking. I didn't know, she blurted out, her voice cracking, about the death certificate. About the will. I swear, Alara, I thought it was standard paperwork. Dad said it was part of the restructuring. I just signed where he told me to. I just stared at her. She looked tired. Thinner than I remembered. As if the months of pretending hadn't sat well on her at all. I was scared, she whispered, her gaze dropping to her hands. He said if I didn't help, I'd lose everything too. So, you chose survival, I stated, my voice flat. Her hands shook slightly as she wrapped them around the untouched coffee cup. I didn't think you'd fight. You always just left. That's because I knew what happened when I stayed, I countered, my eyes burning into hers. I didn't mean for it to get this far. But you let it, I said, the words a hammer blow. Chloe blinked rapidly, tears welling. You have to believe me. No, I said, leaning back. I really don't. She nodded, looking down at her lap, defeated. I wasn't trying to hurt you. I thought I was protecting what was ours. Ours never included me, Chloe, I pointed out, my voice laced with years of pain. Not once. She opened her mouth, then closed it again, unable to find words. You didn't just sign a form, I continued, each word carefully placed. You signed me off the map. You stood there and watched them light it all on fire. I was stupid, she finally choked out. No, I said, shaking my head. You were careful. Stupid would have been forgivable. She wiped at her eyes with the cuff of her coat. So, what now? I took out my phone and set it face down on the table. It had been recording since I sat down. She didn't even notice. I'm not pressing charges, I said. You'll get whatever's fair under the law. But you don't get access. No seats at the table. No stake in the company. You're not part of the rebuild. Her voice cracked again, a raw, desperate sound. I'm still your sister. And I'm still alive. That didn't seem to matter much a few months ago, I replied, standing up. Alara, please. I looked down at her. At this half-finished version of someone who once braided my hair before school, who whispered secrets under the covers. But there was nothing left there I needed to hold on to. You picked your side, I said, the finality heavy in the air. And now you get to live with it. Outside, the wind had picked up, a cruel, biting chill. I zipped my coat and kept walking, past the train station, past people with umbrellas battling the gusts, past the places we used to eat together. None of it felt like it belonged to me anymore. And that was fine. I wasn't trying to reclaim what was lost. I was building something new, with hands they hadn't broken. And Chloe, like the rest of them, would just have to watch. I stepped off the sidewalk and crossed the street without looking back. My keys, clutched tight in my hand, felt like a promise. The building was small, red brick, squat between a vibrant florist and a long-shuttered laundromat. Its tall windows were scuffed, like they'd been ignored for so long they'd forgotten how to let in light. The front lock clicked open easily. I stepped inside. Dust. Silence. The kind of profound emptiness that somehow made room for something entirely new. This was it. The address on the last envelope Grandpa William had marked, "Start here." It used to be a print shop in the 60s. Then a piano studio. Then nothing. Now it was mine. I sat cross-legged on the floor, took out the final envelope from the vault, and opened it slowly. Inside, a sketch of the floor plan in Grandpa William's unmistakable hand, a half-completed business license application, and a small note with 4 words underlined, "Make something they can't erase." So I did. I called the county office, fast-tracking the license. I reactivated my LLC from 3 years ago, Vance Insight Group. It had never really taken off, but it had never officially died either. Within a week, permits were filed, contractors scheduled, paint colors picked. 2 weeks later, the sign went up, Vance Foundation, Veterans. Women. Forward. It wasn't flashy. No ribbon-cutting ceremony. No press photos. Just me and a man named Marcus, who'd served 2 tours in Kandahar and now ran a non-profit building rehab program for women veterans. We drank burnt coffee and signed the paperwork on the front desk counter. "What are you hoping to do here?" he asked, his eyes steady. "Build what I needed 10 years ago," I replied. Marcus nodded, a silent understanding passing between us, as if he knew more than I was even saying. The Foundation's first project, a legal fund for female veterans navigating discharge disputes and post-service housing instability. Second, a mentorship program connecting young women in ROTC with seasoned female officers. I called it Operation Second Voice. Grandpa William would have hated the branding, but he would have loved the fight. Simone joined the board pro bono. Gavin ran the press release through his network. Felix helped set up the data security infrastructure because I trusted only 3 people in this world, and he was still one of them. The money wasn't an issue anymore. I had control now. I didn't need to fight for scraps. I needed to forge those scraps into something sharp enough to cut through. And for the first time, the work felt clean. No more boardrooms full of knives and fake smiles. No more pretending I belonged to people who only saw me as leverage or liability. One morning, I received a letter from an old P.O. box I hadn't touched in years. No return address. Just a crumpled envelope with handwriting I'd know anywhere. Inside, a faded photo of Grandpa William and me at age 7, sitting on the porch. Both of us wearing matching paper crowns he'd made from birthday gift wrap. On the back, in his distinctive script, "Takes more than fire to stop royalty." I pinned it to the corkboard in my office. No frame. Just thumbtacks. Clients came. Partners signed on. The space filled, slowly, purposefully. Not all the wounds healed. Something inside me stayed bruised, yes, but the building stood. And that was enough. One night, I stayed late to clean up after a vet group session. Empty coffee cups. Old paperwork. Chairs out of place. I turned off the lights, locked the door, and stood outside for a second. The street was quiet. The sky was clear. I didn't feel like a daughter or a soldier or a ghost anymore. I just felt solid. Like I'd finally stepped into the version of me they never saw coming. And there wasn't a damn thing they could do about it. I reached for the deed, still tucked securely in my bag, and walked purposefully toward the courthouse steps, feeling like I owned every single brick beneath my feet. The building looked smaller than I remembered. Maybe it was the silence. No eager reporters, no family members feigning concern. Just old stone, worn smooth by years of other people's stories that never made the news. Inside, the clerk barely glanced up before stamping the final confirmation, transfer of deed. Effective immediately. 1 copy for the county. 1 for my file. 1 in my hand. The official seal gleamed under the harsh fluorescent light. Ugly, yes, but breathtakingly beautiful. I walked back out without stopping. No photos. No announcements. Just the steady rhythm of my boots on the concrete, and a document that meant so much more than mere property. It meant they couldn't rewrite me anymore. On the sidewalk, I paused and turned to face the courthouse. I held the deed, not like a trophy, but high enough to see it against the weathered stone, and took one photo. No smile. No caption. Just proof. I turned the screen off and slipped the phone into my pocket. 5 blocks later, I reached another new studio. Not the foundation. Not the main office. This was a narrow storefront I'd quietly closed on 2 days earlier. No one knew about it yet. And that was precisely the point. Tall windows, scuffed floors, and echoes in every corner. It smelled like dust, old paint, and the exhilarating scent of beginnings that didn't ask for permission. Inside the envelope Grandpa William had marked final, I found a folded business plan, half complete, with notes in his familiar handwriting. It suggested a training center for women veterans, for career shifts, for starting over. He'd written, "Some legacies aren't inherited. They're built brick by brick." I spread the plan across the floor and immediately started mapping it out. Budget columns, outreach goals, renovation estimates. My handwriting didn't match his neat script, but the mission? The mission was identical. I didn't build it out of revenge. I didn't build it for applause. I built it so no one else would have to claw their way out of a grave their family had so casually dug for them. A week later, the final paperwork cleared. The studio officially became the pilot site for the Vance Forward Initiative, a transitional hub for women leaving military service. Counseling. Career guidance. Housing referrals. No flag waving. No empty slogans. Just solid ground beneath your feet, and people who didn't flinch when you talked about the dark. Marcus offered to help run the programming. Gavin wanted to write a piece on the launch, but I told him to hold it. Let it grow quiet first, I said. Let it grow real. I didn't need the story anymore. I had the building. I had the work. I had the profound peace that comes when no one is trying to silence you mid-sentence. One morning, I passed Chloe on the street near the foundation. She saw me. She paused. She didn't wave. She didn't speak. Good. I didn't hate her, not anymore, but I certainly didn't owe her space in a life she had tried so hard to sign away. That same day, I received a letter from Sarah, a woman who'd been dishonorably discharged for speaking up about harassment in her unit. She'd found our website. She didn't ask for money. She asked for someone who'd listen. I called her that night. We talked for 2 hours. It wasn't about trauma, not entirely. It was about where to begin. When we hung up, I wrote her name at the top of a fresh file, Client 0001. And that was it. Not an ending. Not a victory lap. Just a door opening that no one, not even my family, could ever close behind me this time. I stood at the studio window later that evening, watching the streetlights flicker to life outside. The glass still had streaks. The floor still needed refinishing. But the space was undeniably mine. And I didn't need to reclaim the past. I was too busy laying down the future. One brick. One name. One decision they'd never get to rewrite. The heater kicked on behind me with a low hum, a gentle reassurance. I didn't move. Didn't rush. Didn't rehearse a speech for anyone who might ask how I got here. Because the answer wasn't complicated at all, they tried to erase me. And I built something they couldn't touch. No spotlight. No throne. Just a solid foundation, forged from the ashes of what they tried to burn, a legacy that would outlive every single lie they told. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever had to fight to reclaim your own narrative, drop a comment below. I want to hear your battles, your rebuilds, and your victories. And if you believe in quiet justice and building legacies that no one can ever erase, hit that like button and subscribe. Let's make sure these stories don't just stay buried. Welcome to the fight. Welcome to the foundation.